Let's continue our series of making the case for Israel, the Jewish people's homeland. The second half of our series, we have been looking at the past 1900 years roughly, the historical record which begins basically after the Second Jewish Revolution against Rome in 135 AD. So we have covered, of course, the period after that, the Byzantine era, the Muslim conquest, the Crusades, the Ottoman Empire, and that took us to the middle of the 19th century. We looked at the words of Mark Twain in his travelogue, Innocents Abroad, and his comments on how deserted and neglected the Holy Land was. We've seen this book, Palestina ex monumentis verturibus illustrata. That was an atlas of the land, showing that there were very few inhabitants in the land in the 17th century. We looked at the four holy cities of Israel, of the Jewish people. Those were the major population quadrants in those days, the 19th century and before that. We looked at Psalm 137, a psalm that predates the time of the New Testament by some 5.5 centuries, a song that tells us never, the Jewish people, never, ever, ever to forget our homeland. We saw the beginning of the evangelical Zionist movement that gave birth here in America. William Blackstone already advocating for the Jewish people to go back to their homeland. He petitioned 2 different presidents over a period of decades, ending with the second petition that was made to Woodrow Wilson. Those are those documents. We looked at the rise of European Jewish Zionism with the figure of Theodor Herzl and his Zionist Congress movement, beginning at the end of the 19th century, 1897, convened the first Zionist Congress. They had meetings thereafter every year in various different European capitals, trying to move the ball forward. The publication of the Jewish State did not do the job, so Theodor Herzl, through force of will, made things happen, prepared the way. Eliezer ben Yehuda, again through force of personality and will and chutzpah, resurrected the Hebrew language as the lingua franca of the Jewish people in the Holy Land, the everyday language. We saw the national anthem, what would become the national anthem. We saw the poem that was written in the 19th century regarding the hope, the ceaseless, endless hope, the timeless hope of the Jewish people, that no matter where they are in the world, wherever they've been dispersed to, that they look to the east and hope once again to return to the land of Zion, specifically to the city of Jerusalem. We saw how small Israel is in the Arab world. It's that little red area toward the top of the map, in a sea of Islamic territory. We saw the Jewish towns and villages in the Ottoman Empire, in the Ottoman controlled Palestine, The beginning of World War I, 1914, the various different Arab towns with no Jewish inhabitants, they're marked there. The Jewish towns and villages, they're marked there. And towns that have a mixed population center are marked there. They're easy to see. They're the ones that are in black. Few and far between, mostly separation, although there are some hot spots where they are on top of one another. We discussed last week the great powers, the European powers, during World War I, which again was the Allies against the Germans and the Ottoman Empire, called the Central Powers. And even as they're fighting World War I, England sends an emissary, France sends an emissary, Sykes, the English one, Picot, the French one, and they take a look at the map of the Middle East, of the area that Turkey controls and that will soon no longer control once the war is won. And they already begin to carve things up. They begin to carve the Middle East, called the Levant, carve it up like a turkey. And you see certain areas, like in Turkey, given toward Italian control. That's the south end of Turkey there. That's looking right across at Greece and, of course, the Mediterranean to Italy. You see the French controlling Syria and northern territories, Lebanon as well, and British control going south. So Iraq, Jordan. Now, these nations, I told you this last week, but it bears repeating because it's really hard to imagine. These nations did not exist. There was no Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Iraq or Jordan. These nations did not exist. Of course, there was in Egypt, there was traditional Lebanon, but under the Ottoman Empire, these were all basically provinces, areas of administrative areas governed by the Turks. And so these nations did not exist. Now, I want you to look at the lines that are drawn here. They are so neat and they are so tidy. What is not neat and tidy are where people actually live. So if we look, for example, at how neatly Iraq is carved out, a nation called Iraq that's actually made up of 3 different peoples. But why jam 3 different peoples? It seems like it's going to bite you in the tuchas later on, and indeed it does. But the European colonial powers, they knew best. And so they said, well, we like a straight line better than we like divvying things up into regions that make sense. So we're going to call this whole area Iraq and give British influence and control to this area. That will create problems later. Many of the areas are divvied up and parceled out according to who owes whom what favor. If you watch the film Lawrence of Arabia, it's a fantastic film, very long, almost 4 hours long. Not as long as World War I was, but it seems like it. And you can see that Europe owed favors to the Jews, and Europe also, the Allies, also owed favors to the Arabs. So sometimes Arab interests, Jewish interests, national interests of Britain, France, etc., these sometimes had conflicting issues. And so, again, these are going to be problematic areas, which is why the Middle East, for so many years, has been beset and bestrewn with civil wars and internal conflicts, because these are artificial boundaries. I've said enough of that. The original idea was for Palestine, what we know as Israel today, to be under international control, shared basically by France and Britain as a as a ship. But this is, and so you can see he's a better image, basically, of seeing the European power areas of influence. And this is, I think, the best one of all. And you can see the flags. See Armenia, we got France and Syria. France, Syria originally went way, way, way up into Turkey. That got redrawn, obviously. Iraq didn't actually wind up extending all the way down into Saudi Arabia. So these were lines that were drawn before World War I was finished. As the war is entering its critical phase, the final phase, America come into the war. It looked all but certain that that the Allies were going to win. An individual by the name of Lord Arthur Balfour in Britain, he wrote a letter that is known as the Balfour Declaration. And from this period on, from 1917 all the way through 1948, so 27, 37, 47, next 30 and a half years, you're going to have a series of international documents and international resolutions and votes and international resolutions declaring a Jewish homeland in the area of Palestine. And so Lord Arthur Balfour wrote a declaration to the Jewish people expressing his Majesty's looking on with great favor for establishing a home in Palestine. This is Lord Balfour, one of the great men in British history, helped steer the nation through World War I, through the League of Nations and the peace treaties that came after World War I. A great, great man, and he is honored in British memory. This is the painting. This painting of Lord Balfour no longer looks like that. Quite recently, i.e., since October 7th, you may have noticed that a powder keg has been unleashed on the world of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred that can couch itself, well, at the beginning, it was able to couch itself in the guise of anti-Zionism or anti-Israel. So I don't really hate Jews. I just am against Israel's policies, right? Or I don't believe that Israel has a right to the land, so I'm anti-Zionist. I'm not anti-Jew. I love Jews. Some of my best friends are Jews. You know, Douglas Murray, British commentator, you may have seen him speak. He calls this the hatred that shape shifts. You see, for thousands of years, you could hate Jews because their religion was different. But then the Jewish people, many of them, abandoned their religion, and by the time we get to World War II, whether you're religious or not, Jewishness was characterized less by religion and more by ethnicity or race. And you have the final solution. Hitler was not gassing Jews who were religious and read the Torah, Hitler was gassing, the Nazis were gassing and killing and exterminating Jews simply because of their race, of their ethnicity. Then, after the Holocaust, it became really gauche to hate Jews because of their race. That's what Hitler did, when I studied Hitler. And you could then shape-shift your Jew hatred and focus it on Israel. It's not Jews, really. It's Israelis that I'm upset with. And specifically, the fact that whatever their policies are, I'm against them. And we can pretend that we hate Zionists and not Jews. But since October 7th, the masks are off. It's not shape-shifting anymore. People now are simply saying, we hate the Jews because they're Jews. We don't just hate Jews in Israel. We hate Jews in London. We hate Jews in Europe. We hate Jews in New York City. We hate Jews at Columbia University. In fact, so many of our fine, distinguished institutions of education have truly distinguished themselves recently by taking off putting on the mask to hide their identity. They mask. But their anti-Semitism, their anti-Jewishness, their Jew hatred no longer is masked. It's simply Jews, right? I don't know if you saw that one guy, and I won't play it. I won't give him any time of day. The head of the resistance in Colombia. He's on video. He spread this, saying, you're lucky I'm not just killing Zionists, although I hope I don't. Really? You hope you're not going to kill Jewish people? What's going to restrain you? You want to, you hope not to, you leave it to chance. I probably won't. Probably yes, probably no. Right? And so, getting back to the point, Lord Balfour's great painting now it looks like this. It has been sliced. You can see the surgical incisions destroying the painting. And then, as if that were not enough, to spray red paint all over this painting. But what should surprise us in a world that dresses up a statue of the father of our nation, George Washington, in a keffiyeh cape and with a mask on his head, covering his face in the garden, and raising the flag of Palestine, the Palestinians, taking down the United States, which should be clear indication that it always starts with the Jews, right? The famous statement, they came for the Jews. I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't care, right? But then finally, they came for me. See, they're not pretending now either. That's not just Jews. They hate America. They hate the West, this whole mob out there. They hate everything the West stands for. But nonetheless, the West stands for civilization, stands for truth, stands for ultimate reality. And if there is no ultimate truth, if there is no ultimate reality, what can we trust? Well, I tell you what we can trust. It's not a what, it's a whom. We can trust our Lord, no matter what our culture says. So that's Lord Balfour. But Lord Balfour's declaration, it's a short, see, look, it's a little short thing, right? And I don't know if he was a doctor, but his signature stinks too. just like, but he writes to Lord Rothschild, which was one of the patrons, Jewish patrons, trying to get the Zionist movement off the launching pad. I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has now been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. So, when it comes to the Bible, we've covered that regarding the Jewish right to their homeland being in Israel. When it comes to history, we've covered that. Now we come, as we approach and are in the 20th century, we deal with a series of legal binding resolutions that are either binding a particular nation or an international body. This is very, very important because it is the ignorance of the documents that we're going to discuss right now that can end an argument, or should be able to end an argument. But again, if there's no ultimate truth, and who cares, and Western colonial powers are all corrupt, etc., and it all has to be burned down, it all has to be torn down, then what are you going to do? You can't argue. Okay. But if you want to reason, this is the approval of the king, of the government of England, and the cabinet of the prime minister. This is 1917. What did I say, November of 1917? Yes, November 1917. He said, His Majesty's government, this is the language, short, sweet. His Majesty's government view with favor, spelled in the British way, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. So it's not a guarantee, it's not a fact, because it doesn't depend on just Britain. But they're saying that we are in your corner and we are advocates for a Jewish home a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. And they will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. That's very important because remember, there are, during World War II, or right after that, there were just under 2 million residents by this point in Palestine, leading up to 1947, 2 million residents at the time, and there's about 2 to 1 Arab to Jewish population at that point, okay? And then there's some others, right? So there's about 700,000 Jewish people, 650,000 Jewish people, and about 1.2 million Arabs, and some others in there. So the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities shall not be prejudiced, okay, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So, just because, there's two things here, just because the Jewish people are going to have a homeland set up for them in Palestine, or at least that's the object to which His Majesty's government is going to work to facilitate, it doesn't mean that, it doesn't reflect at all on the Jewish communities dispersed around the world. The Jews in America are no longer illegitimately in America or in England or wherever just because they have a Jewish homeland. Okay? So it has nothing to do with Jewish people living outside of the land. If they want to be there, they can, but they don't have to be there. And those non-Jews, Arabs, Christians, Muslims, who are presently in the land of Palestine, they will not be forced to become Jewish or be exiled. They may have civil rights, they may have religious rights in this Jewish state. Something, by the way, that doesn't exist for Jewish rights in any Islamic state. Pick your Arab state, and Jewish people do not have the same civil rights. They are not welcome. They are not treated the same way. We talked about second-class citizenship, and we talked about persecution, and that's why once Israel, spoiler alert, once Israel declares itself independent, the Jewish people from the Arab states are immediately driven out. They're like, you have your own state? Okay, go, get out. We didn't want you anyway, and you can't take anything with you. So take the clothes on your back and be thankful. We'll take your houses. We'll take your property. Thank you very much. That happens throughout the Middle East. Right? We'll get to that. Well, we don't need to get to that later because that's an important point. Right? Again, I'm going a little bit out of order here. 1948, when the Jewish people declare independence and 6 Arab countries attack the Jewish people and try to drive them into the sea, and the Arabs living there either decide we're staying out of the conflict, or they're going to follow the advice of their leaders and say, get out of the way of the Arab nations so you don't want to get caught in crossfire, abandon your homes and come back and we'll take everything the Jews have built once the Arab states have destroyed. Well, there were approximately 600,000 Palestinian Arab refugees. Right? They are the Arab, the Palestinian refugees you hear about today. They are the descendants, the only people, refugee people in the world that actually have multiple generations of descendants that retain their refugee status. Nonetheless, they have about 600,000 Jewish refugees from the Arab nations. It's actually almost parity. Not parity, but parity as in the same numbers. 600,000 Jewish people driven from the Arab lands and to Israel, 600,000 Palestinian Arabs who decide to run. We couldn't run. So we never hear about the Jewish refugees from Egypt and from Morocco and from Tunisia and from Yemen and from Iran and from Iraq. We don't hear about the Jewish refugees. Why is that, I wonder? Simple answer. They were immediately taken in by Israel. A refugee ceases to be a refugee once they find a national home. And the Jewish people all were accepted and brought into the nation of Israel. The Palestinian, the Arabs who lived there and were refugees, they were not allowed to be taken into Egypt or to Yemen or to Iraq they weren't allowed to come in. No, they weren't wanted. They're Arabs. Why wouldn't their fellow Arabs want them? They're Muslims. Isn't there an affinity for other? No. The Arab nations decided that since they couldn't win the war with Israel, they would try warfare by using the Palestinian Arabs as pawns and creating this giant refugee process, which continues today. It's unique in the history of the world. There is we'll talk about this later on, but there is no group in the world no refugee group in the world like the Palestinians. The United Nations has a committee, an organization that's dedicated to worldwide refugees wherever they are. They helped resettle the refugees after World War II and various different conflicts that occur in the world. They're helpful. They facilitate population transfers, like, for example, when Pakistan was created, carved out of India. There was a tremendous, Pakistan is where Muslims live, and India is where Hindus live. And so they split, and instead of fighting a long war within India, they created another nation, Pakistan, United Nations. And the Muslim population within India was transferred to Pakistan, and the Hindi population was transferred to, I'm not an expert on this, but transferred to India. Population transfers happen all the time. And maybe you read about it in the middle of the New York Times at the time. It's not really big news. But the Palestinian and the Jewish transfer is forgotten, the Palestinian is remembered. Because Palestinians are not served by the United Nations Refugee Committee organization that takes care of every other refugee. There is a very special one, UNWR, UNRWA, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's just for Palestinian refugees. And its budget is actually bigger than the one that takes care of all the other refugees from every other war going on in the world. And it continues and actually runs the schools and and takes care of all the stuff that they're learning. And in fact, we found out that several of the United Nations employees were actually in cahoots working for and with Hamas. We wouldn't have found it out if they didn't go in and fight, but they found it out. So, nonetheless, I digress. Getting back to Lord Balfour, the issue was they can stay where they are. It's just going to be a Jewish state and a Jewish-administered state. And by the way, because I can't not speak about this, when anybody talks about a two-state solution, it's very interesting to me to hear about a two-state solution, and we hear, the Jewish people want to ethnically cleanse the Arabs, the Palestinians, from their population. Not so. There's over 1 million, maybe 1.5 million Arab citizens, those descendants of the Arabs who lived there, who wanted to stay and become citizens. They were welcomed. And so you have not only Arabs who are citizens, you have Arabs who serve in the Knesset, who are the Congress of Israel, on the courts. They have every right, right? But what about Palestinian states? If we have Palestinian territories, I know what they're like, right? What do they want? No Jews. What does Hamas want? No Jews. Not only in Gaza, but no Jews anywhere, right? West Bank, if they actually were to become a state, all the states that were offered over the years, 5 of them, they were all Judenrein, without Jews, ethnically cleansed of Jews. Jews would have to be within Israel's territory, and the Arabs would be in their own state. So, having said that, that's the Balfour Declaration. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. That's Lord Balfour. Now, the period of the British mandate, World War I ends. Sykes and Picot's lines don't really hold, but the ideas do, okay, of general areas, nations that are created out of fiat, by fiat, out of nothing, because lines seem to make sense. In many instances, that actually does happen. But the British are given a territory, Palestine, to to have a mandate over. The idea of a mandate is that you superintend. You're going to govern this area until such time as the indigenous peoples, and this is not just true for Palestine, the British mandate, but there's mandates throughout. The great powers will administer until we get the native population strong enough and capable enough to be able to hand over control of that area to those people. So it's very paternal. Think about it as government patronage. Okay, Daddy, whatever the government may be France over Syria or Vietnam, okay, over there, or Lebanon, maybe England over Britain rather over Iraq, over Palestine. They're going to take care of them until such time as they can hand off that nation to the population. And the mandate for Palestine is given at the League of Nations, by the League of Nations, which is the forerunner of the United Nations. Go back to social studies, go back to your history classes from high school. And the League of Nations, this was Woodrow Wilson's dream, but Congress did not approve our entry, America's entry into the League of Nations, which did not mean, however, that we didn't participate in the League of Nations and that we were not influential in the League of Nations, although we were not ourselves part of the League of Nations. But nonetheless, the mandate is given for Palestine. This is the area that was declared to be Palestine. And you can see the various different mandates. You see, like above, the nation of Syria is under a French mandate. You see contiguous next to east of Palestine, you see Iraq, that's also under British mandate until they find the right king, that they have to return the right favor to the right tribe of Bedouins or Arab sheik to install to rule these areas. Okay, again, so much turmoil. Just look at the history of Iraq, not just the past 20 years. Look at the history of Iraq from World War I. Look at the history of Syria, not just yesterday, but from World War I. It is continuously problematic. Nonetheless, you can see that the Golan Heights were included in the mandate for Palestine regarding back in 1920 when the League of Nations had met. Now, in 1922, I just want to fast forward 1 year, and our 67th Congress, Session 2, you can see that it's not only Britain getting into the act. Britain at that point had Balfour, said, we are favorable to this. We're going to work toward this end. After World War I, they are given a mandate to take care of this area, and with the understanding that it is going to be safeguarded for a homeland for the Jewish people. Now America, again, not part of the League of Nations, but America nonetheless throws its opinion into the hat. This is American law, resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled. I bet you've never learned this, you've never heard this, and you certainly have never read this in the Times or heard this on the news. This is the resolution: that the United States of America favors the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, not a two-state solution, for the Jewish people, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice this sounds like Balfour, right? It is Balfour. Which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of Christian and all other non-Jewish communities in Palestine, and that the holy places and religious buildings and sites in Palestine shall be adequately protected. Approved September 21st, 1922. It's the Balfour Declaration that is just repeated and resolved by the United States Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, recognizing that the Jewish people have a right to a homeland, protecting all religions in this land, all of the buildings. So in other words, if so often has happened, you have what was a synagogue or a church, and then Islam came and took that area. All of a sudden, that church becomes a mosque, or that synagogue gets refaced, becomes a mosque, right? That's not going to happen because it's resolved by the Senate and House that the United States stands behind the Jewish people having a homeland. There's a lot of stuff that didn't get done in 1918 when the League of Nations first formed, and the peace Treaty of Versailles. A lot of stuff didn't happen. The cleanup operation after the big pieces, the big European pieces were dealt with, it's followed by the cleanup operation in April of 1919. As the League of Nations, they had another conference. This was, again, it was a cleanup conference. It's the San Remo Conference. The San Remo Conference recognizes the League of Nations recognizing the Jewish right to a national homeland in Palestine. So, Balfour Declaration, England, the United States of America making their resolution for a homeland for the Jewish people. The League of Nations, the forerunner to the United Nations, League of Nations, San Remo Conference, Jewish people have a homeland in Palestine. The Treaty of Sèvres. Anybody know the Treaty of Sèvres? August 1920. This is where the Ottoman Empire basically gets carved up. And various areas of the Ottoman Empire, including Palestine, formally are moved from the control of the Ottoman Turks, and the treaty is finally signed to give some to Britain, some to France, mandates that we've seen, okay, as they carve up the Middle East. Treaty of Sèvres is followed by the League of Nations official 1923 recognition of the Jewish people's historical connection to Palestine. It says this: whereas, this is the Balfour Declaration is included in this area, in this mandate as well, with an additional line regarding the historical connection of the Jewish people to Palestine. And that's why they have a right. It's not just because we feel sorry for them or we think it's a good idea. It's because they have a historical connection. This is not something the world felt sorry after the Holocaust and said, well, let's make Israel a nation. This is 20 years before the Holocaust. And it reads as follows: League of Nations mandate for Palestine. Whereas recognition has thereby been given to the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. It doesn't get clearer than that. The reason that the League of Nations is declaring that the Jewish people have a homeland in Palestine, it is because of the historical connection the Jewish people have with the land. All that we have discussed up to this point, the 2,000 years of biblical history and the 1,900 years of post-biblical history leading up. This is why they're going to reconstitute this is a legally binding document signed by or approved by the League of Nations. Here it is. International recognition. Now, along with that came a compromise. That whole area of Palestine, favors come due, right? And there were more Arab chieftains and sheikhs than you can shake a stick at. More favors that were owed to the Arab leaders than were to the Jewish people. And Winston Churchill, foreign secretary at the time, he decided, and Britain decided, well, 2/3, you take a guess what that is. It's officially 80%. I'll just say, okay, 3/4 of Palestine will now be divided. And east of the Jordan River will be called Transjordan and given to a particular Arab family, the Hashemites. That's why they call the Hashemite kingdom of what was called Transjordan is now shortened to Jordan. The Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, because it was given to, and I can't remember if that's Omar Sharif or who that is in the Lawrence of Arabia, but it's one of those guys, gets that area. And so goodbye to any Holy Land in Palestine east of, it's gone. It now belongs to a people who never existed in the history of peoples. Jordanians. Right? Who are the Jordanians? They are, yesterday, they were Palestinian Arabs living alongside Palestinian Jews in the region of Palestine. But now that area is cut off from Palestine. So yesterday's Palestinian Arabs, or Arab Palestinians, are today's Jordanians. Boop. Okay. So what is Jordan? It's an Arab Palestinian state. It's just called Jordan. And it's administered by a particular family. It's not like they're the majority in Jordan. They're a minority. And they hold on to power dearly because there is a Palestinian majority. They don't take censuses because that would be problematic. Right? Nor do they let in Palestinians from Israel, from the West Bank, because they dare not. They're afraid to do so. All right. So anyway, this is what happens. The Golan Heights are also, they are in conflict, but they are given to France, and they're made part of Syria, which actually creates a tremendously difficult area for the Jewish people in the region of the Galilee, the lake, the Galilee, because from the heights you can fire down. So those were given. It's a lot of horse trading. This is politics. It's horse trading. All right. Anyway, there are many more documents I want to talk to you about regarding the British mandate for Palestine. Because what happens, politicians can make whatever rules they want to make, whatever laws they want to make. But what happens when the people living in that area get the news that this is the new status quo? Do they all greet it with delight, or is there problem? Stay tuned. We're going to continue this, I think, very interesting and untold story of making the case for the Jewish homeland. Now we're making an international legal case for the Jewish people's right to the land. Well, we'll do more next time.